setup.
Okay.
So.
Awesome. So, just a final couple of things, just to let you know, I'm going to record this session. It's not going to go out publicly or anywhere, but I'm just recording it so I can upload it to YouTube privately, and then I can give you the link if you want to watch it back and go over anything afterwards, or even see
Memory,
what.
so that'll probably be helpful.
Okay, yeah, same here. You can also then see what I was looking at any given point if I was looking at different camera angles whilst you're driving, that kind of thing. And on Discord, when I want to show you something, I'll set it live right now. I will turn on my camera. It's not actually a camera, it's just OBS virtual camera. And then when you go to Discord, you should be able to see what I'm looking at. You can kind of click it, make it bigger, but you've basically just got my view. Right, cool. So to start off with then, if you're okay to do this, we'll go out and do 5 laps. I'll just keep my mouth shut and just ride on board with you and watch from a couple of different angles. And just do 5 laps as you would if I wasn't here. Just kind of like a short practice stint.
Okay.
And that's it.
Let's do it. So easy to hit the rev limiter on this thing.
It is.
Usually takes a lap and a half, I found yesterday, to get this guy actually warmed up.
Yeah, the tires suck on lap 1 in this car.
And the interesting thing that I found is that I'm about a second off the pace, regardless of what car I drive or whether it's real life or racing. So I feel like there's actually something wrong with what I'm doing, as opposed to just not knowing how to drive in racing games.
A second's obviously not a massive gap. It's a gap that's spread out over a whole lap as well. So it's going to be small things probably in a few areas, but...
Exactly, yeah. But it feels like a massive gap when you look at the end of the day. Let's see if we can actually make a lap happen. Postcard from that Apex. Slow through there. Slow down? Nope. That's nice.
It's nice when they let you off.
Yeah. It's okay. I still managed to fuck it up.
So let's do 3 more timed laps. So we'll do 3 more. We'll get 3 more lap times on the board.
Okay. Turn too much. A little bit of oversteer.
That's okay. So this one won't be our lap that we really go back and analyze afterwards. So
That's all right. Sure, I'll eventually get one. I had my optimal down to a 53.2 yesterday, but obviously did not capitalize on that. At least get this apex here. Probably don't need to break it all there. So that off track on the inside apex is very unforgiving, unless it looks like I'm actually just monstering that curve, but it doesn't feel like it. Bang. Time to not embarrass oneself. Let's do it. Oh,
up to that point, that was a really nice lap. That was a real decent effort up to there. So we might still, if your last one that's coming up isn't like kind of tidier than that in general, ignoring the lap time, we might use most of that as a bit of a review, because I think that's probably representative of you doing it nicely, that last one, apart from Stowe. I'll shut up and let you do one more.
All right, let me try one more. Let's see. Felt pretty good though. But it was still about a second off the pace. There we go. A little bit better. Stay on. Yes. That's it. So 1 in 5 acceptable laps. Okay, great. It's good to know.
Right, good job. That was nice. So you can reset to the pits and have a little bit of a rest. So that was cool. That was nice to ride on board with that for the first run. So as suspected, obviously you're quite a bit further on in your sim racing development than the majority of people that I sit and coach. So
I appreciate that.
There's a few places, particularly on this track, and I'm glad this is a relevant track to you for a race coming up, because I also just quite like using this as a starter, because there's lots of nice, kind of interesting different types of corners and quite a bit of room to run off if you do get it wrong. But there's a few lines that a lot of people will take some time to figure out, or maybe never figure out, that you were just doing straight away. So there's a few places that we actually don't need to work on at all, that are some of the trickier things, so that makes me happy. We can work on some easier things, some lower hanging fruit, and we will dive into the data with you today, because I think we can be a bit more specific than with most people, especially if you're used to looking at data. It'll actually mean a lot more to you anyway. So fingers crossed in the background, that's just all uploading like normal. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. But before then, if you could go on Discord, if you're not already, and just have a look so you can see my screen. You can see what I'm looking at. Yeah, I'll just keep talking so you can check. Is that okay, that volume?
Yep, all good.
Awesome. Okay, so on Discord, you should be able to see what I'm looking at, which is just a kind of roll bar view of your car. And I'm sure you know if you just click on that image, it should make it bigger so you can see it a bit more easily. Okay, I'm just going to go over your last lap there, which I think we can probably agree was the tidiest overall. Although there were definitely elements of lap 4, which were really good. And I'm just going to go corner by corner, see what you think, see whether or not you thought that was like a representative or as good as you could probably do it version of a corner. And if there's a couple of places, like specific places, where I think we might be able to gain some time, I'll mention them, and then we'll compare to the data afterwards and see whether it kind of it agrees with me or not. So let's have it. And I'm pretty sure the laps that I did as some benchmarks were the same conditions. I just kind of made this identical session, so it would be a good comparison. So obviously, as we go across the start line, I know you can't hear this, by the way. I can hear the engine and you can't, but you can probably remember what it sounded like. So first things to check at turn 1, are you using all the track? You certainly are, so that's good. You know, a lot of people will shy away from this curb on the entry, so this is good. And are you full throttle through turn 1?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Up to sixth.
Yep.
And
Yep.
staying there. And I feel like it's just that weird middle ground where if you drop down to fifth, you're just going to tap on the limiter anyway.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm the same. I don't know whether I'm up to 6 slightly earlier than you or about the same. We'll have a look in the data later, but pretty much exactly where I would want to turn in. You've got to be careful for getting an off track on the inside, but you obviously don't. You've probably got a slight extra bit of margin there, but not a huge amount. Real good line through turn one. So I doubt we're going to see much time gain through there. Now through this,
800
sorry, go
down. Just
okay.
like by the time I got through sector one,
Through the whole of sector. So what is that compared to? Is that
was compared to just even an earlier lap from this session. So I think I was just giving it a little bit too much steering angle to scrub speed.
Okay, so you, as in compared to yourself on this particular lap. Right, understood. Okay, no problem. So that obviously takes into account the whole of these first couple of corners. But were you saying you were 800ths down before you'd even left turn one here?
No, turn one and turn two.
Yeah, okay.
It's down after that.
No problem. So if I'm remembering correctly, I think there's a little bit of time through this one that we could gain. Yeah, and this is a real easy thing, real simple thing. We're just going slightly further than we need to. It's a real kind of compromise between how much do you want to scrub the front tyres versus how short a distance you want to go. But I reckon you can just shave off a couple of feet just by using that curb, and you probably do on most other laps. But on this one, we just didn't, and we were just a bit wider, that's all. So probably around that whole corner, there's like 2 or 3 total extra meters, but certainly nothing dramatic. So you've not lost a massive amount. So let's have a look into here. I think I remember you being pretty nice and neat and really hitting this apex. So let's see if you did it on this lap.
I think I broke a little early there.
Yeah, so that one wasn't the best you've gone through there. I think the previous lap, you were slightly better through it. So I know what you're aiming for. You're trying to get your right-hand tyre, obviously, on that flat curb, which is exactly what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And I think we maybe just turned in slightly late for this one. So we can compare when we look at our steering traces compared later. But I think you can probably get away with going in a little earlier, about now, and you're really cranking the lock on at this point right now. So you'll obviously get, in fact, this here is something to pay attention to for later, and I think we're going to see this in the data for sure. It's the amount of steering lock that you've cranked on here. I'll put a pin in that. We'll just take a look at steering lock amount through the rest of the lap at certain points. I've got a feeling one of the areas we're going to find you some time is in the pure amount we're turning the steering wheel. But I'll just leave it there for the moment and crack back to this view. It's just nice so we can see the whole front end. So obviously on that lap, we didn't quite make that apex, but I know that's what you're aiming to do. And because it's such a short run on the exit, that's why I think you can probably get away with going in a little bit earlier to that hairpin, just because you don't have a massive gain. Obviously, the gain you do have by turning in late is it allows you to more easily get a nice run into the next corner. So there is a kind of balance to be struck there. But I think even if you go in a little bit earlier into here, which I think you did on other laps, you've got just about enough time to get the car back over to the right-hand side ready for this one. So let's have a look at this next one. I like that you're staying in second between those two. It'd be easy to go up to third and then immediately have to go back down. I experimented. I'm pretty sure it's definitely quicker just staying in second, even if you bounce off the limiter once or twice like you did there.
Yeah,
and
I
this
use the limiter as a braking zone, like, right about.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad shout, to be honest. I think it's probably about right for that corner. And here, I mean, we hit the apex really, really nicely. The only thing I'm interested in, though, is just having another look at exactly how much steering lock we get to. So we've got kind of a good amount there, and we really crank it almost. We do a little bit of extra. You see, see how the car actually doesn't rotate any better. About this point here, the front tyres are already slightly slipping, and then about now we crank on a little bit extra.
Just to get that little bit of understeer,
Yeah, and so that I think we might see a common theme. This is something when I had a little look at the data earlier, it stood out slightly. So anyway, again, I haven't looked at the data for this lap and in these exact conditions, etc. So we'll have a look later on. But certainly, nice apex. You're definitely aiming to hit the curb here. All good. I think that's very, very similar to what I'm doing through there.
That's interesting that you mentioned the steering angle, because I've definitely focused in the past on minimizing steering inputs, and I feel like I've gone away from that just because I you know, it was helpful at the time. I internalized it, and then I was just, you know, okay, just do your thing and keep going. So maybe I do need to go back to that.
It's something that I personally have to be careful of in my own driving, because I do sometimes see, when comparing against other people that are kind of similar pace to me, I do sometimes see this exact thing where I've asked for slightly more steering angle than I actually needed for the, you know, for the tightness of the corner or the line I was on or whatever, and I have to be quite conscious of it. So if you're doing any more than I am, then that suggests that it might be definitely too far, because I'm already quite bad for it. Right, this bit here is probably quite straightforward. So again,
input there. That's good.
I reckon we can probably cut a little bit more off here. Obviously, you do get an off track if you go too tight, but just tiny incremental gains everywhere will add up eventually. So I think just chop a tiny bit more off of this one.
That's a good point.
Maybe just like try and touch that green bit as a guide. Yeah. So it's not a lot though. So the thing I'm interested here is exactly what point you're changing gear, because you mentioned that it's easy to hit the limiter, and it definitely is. So I'm just going to have a look and see exactly what revs you go up to the next gear. Obviously, the data will tell us precisely what kind of revs. So it's like 7,150, something like that. That's what it looked like to me.
That's about right.
Oh no, about 7,002. Just as it got to 7.2. I think that's pretty much bang on, but that's something I didn't check whilst you were driving.
Yeah. I find that on the straights, I'll actually look down at the little lights and make sure that I maximize it.
And obviously the steering wheel guide in this car is pretty good for telling you when. So it's this section here that people find complex and tricky and always do their own kind of freestyle variation on. And I thought you were very good through this section. I'd be surprised if we see very much time gain through here, or much potential gain through here. But the things I like to see is carrying lots and lots of speed in for as long as you can, whilst the corner is gentle and open. At the beginning, you're going quick, and you're only getting to the minimum speed at the point you need to, which is like here, basically. And you're on the gas as soon as you know you're going to make this section. You can hear you can't hear, sorry, but you're really feeding in the power, and then boom, straight to full throttle. You're not just having a big old coast in the middle. And that's what most people do. The majority of people will come through here and try and end up in the middle or to the left to try and take a nice wide open entry into Luffield, but that's the wrong compromise, and you're taking the correct compromise. You're barreling on in here quick. You don't care about the short straight. You don't really care about the entry to Luffield, because it's such a long corner that you're going to get to the inside and have to wait anyway. And you do this nice thing where you carry some speed, chop this curb off on the right. Again, this is the right thing to do. Let it blend wide in the middle, and then kind of take a second apex at the end. Really, really good. I would spend days trying to get someone to do exactly what you're already doing through there. So keep that the same. That's really nice. So we can literally cross off that whole section. Maybe when we compare the data, there's like small margins, but I think that's good. So we'll leave that one aside for the moment.
Getting on the gas coming out of this is always a little hairy.
Yes.
You have to be super gentle. There must be a bump in there or something.
This, again, is another place where I reckon we can gain. When you add this to the other distances that we can gain, this is another meter or a couple of meters. There's no penalty at this section here at Woodcut for really cutting this little right-hander off. So you can be, if you want to be like really nice and legal, maybe keep one tyre on the white line, but you could effectively totally cut this, and you wouldn't get any kind of off track. It would take an external steward or a complaint from someone to get you penalised for this. There's no automatic penalty. So I just go slightly shorter distance, so run your left tyres on the black and white curb rather than your right ones, basically, just to take a shorter distance there. Again, in isolation, it's obviously a tiny gain, but when you add it to the others, it'll be something. Right, approach to cops. Most people, again, don't use this curb. You are, just like at turn 1. So, really good. Another thing I won't have to tell you, because you're already doing it naturally. So, I'm sure you'll just continue to do this naturally. So, that's good. But I think you go down a gear here. So, let's have a look and let's have a listen. Yeah, so you go down to 5th. I tried both. And although the revs drop a little bit, staying in 6th, if you nail the line, I always found a couple of tenths gain staying in 6th gear through here. Obviously, if you go deep and you scrub speed, then you'll necessitate 5th gear. But if we if we work on the basis that you're going to do it right eventually, you know, even if you do it slightly wrong the first couple of times without the engine braking down to fifth, ultimately, I think it's quicker staying in sixth gear. This car's just got so much downforce. When the tyres are warm, lap one, probably fifth is better. But once you're up to temperature, sixth worked for me really well through here. So we'll just... Sorry, go for it. I was just going to say...
braking at all?
I think maybe I am. Just a tiny bit, just to get the angle in. I can't remember. It's certainly not conscious, but it'll be potentially a very, very small amount just to get that initial angle that I want. So you can then get straight to full throttle and drive through the corner. Certainly from like here, I'm sure I'm back to full throttle by this point and just driving off the corner. But we'll have a look at the data just to check my memory. But yeah, sixth gear and just really carrying the speed. Fifth, whenever I went to fifth, I would end up on the limiter way too early. And I think, I've just basically held myself back. I had enough grip just to carry a bit more momentum. So that will be, if we manage to get that right, probably quite a potentially big time gain through cops. And nice that you're not afraid to use this exit curb. It's actually very lenient here. So you can kind of go even wider. I think as long as you've got, although it says on here, you can see my screen, can't you? On here, on the rules, when you look down at what it says you can get away with and what you can't, it says that on the exit of cops, where is it? Is it further up here? I thought it showed us cops. Somewhere. It's showing us like every other corner, turn 5, turn 6. That's earlier on, that's earlier on. It's the next one here. But yeah, okay, it's not, I think this might be the exit of... Yeah, it must be. Anyway, I thought it told you that if you ran further than the white line, you get a penalty. But actually, I think as long as you keep your right tyres on the black and white curb here, you get away with it. So just play around with that. But you've got some margin anyway, is the answer. So we'll try sixth, and you have to get it right. But once the tyres are up to temperature, this car is quite easy to place through the high-speed corners consistently, I've found. So, right, let's carry on. This next section is definitely where the other big time gain is. You say you're like a second off. I think probably half of that is through Maggots and Beckett's. So let's have a look at that.
Because it's flat out.
Okay, so first thing here, let's just go on the far chase.
Yep.
We probably want to turn in slightly earlier, and we definitely want to, so we want to be just reaching the apex a little earlier, so we're facing, you can't, if I hold my hand up to my screen, of course you can't see what I'm doing. so the car is just angled slightly more to the right than it is at this point. So if we take a shallower line in and aim to use this red sausage curb. You would never do it in real life, because you'd probably die. But in iRacing, it's totally stable in every car I've ever driven, even the skittiest cars, by running your left tyres over that red sausage curb. And like I say, slightly earlier. So if we go in the cockpit view, it's probably easier to line it up. So I would be turning in about now and aiming where my cursor is for the left tyres to just be on top of it. And it won't unsettle it. It won't spin you around. It should. Realistically, it probably should. But it doesn't. And so you can run those tyres on there. And that effectively just opens up the right-hand part that you're coming to a little bit. Every foot you can be further to the left is a couple of degrees, probably less steering lock you're going to need at the next apex. And it just really sends you into this right-hander a little bit more easily. And we can be a little bit more over this orange lumpy curb, which again, I wouldn't suggest doing in real life, but you just get away with it in iRacing. So as long as you don't get an off track, I'd say we want to just be slightly further to the right. You can see we've got quite a bit of angle. Yeah, I have too, but you will eventually. You kind of just find the balance, and it just doesn't. But just a bit more curb than we are using, and it'll be easier to do that if you're just slightly further left at this point. It's again just a small thing, but because you're close enough to the ultimate pace that it's just going to be lots of small things, and that's one of them. Now, the next thing is the way we're slowing down for this corner. So the line is pretty good. This is basically the line that I would take. But you're getting to this left-hander and using this as quite a big deceleration zone. So I can hear you're going down 2 gears at this point. And so you're kind of getting all the deceleration done here, which then allows you to stay quite far to the left for this next right-hander, and then you have a real nice, easy drive. I mean, the position you're coming from here, all the way to the left here, I have never been anywhere near that close to the left because the speed I've carried into this section won't allow me to be. And that says something to me. That says that we're over-slowing it through here. So where you're coming in here, and that line there is perfect, by the way. It's really nice. But you're going brake, down, down, and then you're able to stay really far to the left, like I say, giving you a nice run onto the hanger straight. Unfortunately, by giving yourself that much run, we've given away a few tenths of a second just in that little section between the left and the right-hander. And with a car with this much downforce anyway, you can actually get away with entering this right-hander more from the middle of the track here and having made a lovely big gain into this corner because you're not aiming to end up here, you're aiming to end up over here somewhere. So you can carry quite a bit more speed. And instead of going down 2 gears at once, kind of like a large brake, down, down, and then sweeping around to the right, I would go down 1. So down 1 and carry loads of speed, down another and back on the gas. So it's kind of splitting up that deceleration into 2 separate parts. And it's more of a gradual deceleration. And it'll mean you're going at the absolute maximum speed that it's possible to carry through that little section for longer, rather than there's a section here where, although you are going to definitely get a gain from here, you're definitely gaining something with the line you've taken there. You've lost too much to make up what you've lost, if that makes sense. So
it does make sense. Interesting. Okay, so when would you deploy that versus setting up? Because, you know, I actually just started doing this after I realized that Sonoma, when I was in my actual car. Yeah. What was that? Turn 1, 2, 3. So like between 3 and 4, you know, it's like the little downhill braking zone, left hand, and then right hand up to the other downhill braking zone. I was just kind of barreling through, sort of trying to do exactly that, minimize the amount of speed loss in that little chute between 3 and 4, but then I was hurting myself with my apex speed, you know, once you come over that crest. And so, you know, then I figured, oh, this is kind of a similar corner, maybe I should be doing that here, but it sounds like not.
So you asked, when do you deploy this? Like, how would you know when to do either thing? And basically, my answer would be, and this is not a nice answer, not an easy one, it's when the evidence shows that the other way is actually quicker. So an example of the way you're doing it here is, I might employ this if I was racing someone and they were already using up all the nice clean air on the line I wanted to be, and my focus was on getting a real better exit than them, so at some point down the hanger straight, I'm going to get a run on them to pass them in their slipstream. That might be one option. But in terms of in clean air going for a lap time, in this particular car at least, I would always go for the line that I'm advocating, where you're moving the compromise a bit more to not having the world's best ever exit from the right-hander, but you've gained enough in this section that it was worthwhile. And the other big thing is, because this car's got a bunch of downforce, and the exit, if we just run through even in like a medium slow-mo, the exit here is really wide. You've got so much room to play with that, I mean, on this lap, actually, you only just made it without an off-track. But you've got all this space out to here that you don't necessarily have on some other corners. So maybe your Sonoma example, you don't have, I guess, a bunch of Formula 3 downforce. So the ability to kind of take a slightly less than ideal line and still make it. And this corner, again, like I say, really opens up wide. The next corner is a left-hander, but it's so wide, you don't need to be in the middle or on the right to make the left-hander. So you can kind of just forget the fact that ordinarily you'd have to compromise an exit here somehow so you could make the next corner. You don't have to worry about that here because it's such a gentle left out through this one onto the hanger straight. So I'm just going to ride on board and just run that through one more time at full speed through the whole of it, because I think this is probably our key focus session for the next run. So sausage it really looks more extreme on board actually, because I'm so used to feeling like I'm basically almost on the grass here. So bit of sausage curb, bit more curb on the right, brake down, but then carry more speed here, and then kind of a lift and down and flat out through this second part.
Okay.
Now, I'm curious, once we've finished going through the rest of this lap, I'm curious to see exactly how different that looks on the data. But let's have a look at the rest before we go back to that, and then we'll get you driving again. So back to the gyro cam, which is there.
I definitely know how to analyze data to really see where I'm losing time to myself.
Yeah.
But getting kind of geeky and granular into the data, a little less so.
Okay. I'll try not to go too geeky and granular. We'll look for the big ticket item. This looks pretty nice to me. So Stowe is an early turn in. You're turning in basically at the 50-meter board. I don't use it as a marker, but every time I look back at a replay, it just tends to be roughly where the 50-meter board is. And we can definitely use a bit more curb here. This is probably the first example I've seen where you haven't opened up the entry to a corner. We can go slightly wider. Again, tiny gain. It's just add it to the other ones, that's all. And then through the middle here, you're going to take a relatively early apex, which is good through Stowe. You've got plenty of downforce still at this point. You're apexing it just the right point.
It could probably be over a little bit more, but...
Yeah, you probably could use a tiny bit more curb. The only thing with this curb is because it is slightly sloped, it will just try and push you off a little bit. It's not quite as nice to use as some of the totally flat curbs. But you could use a bit more. You're right. You could use just a little bit more. And obviously the key through here is to just get on the power super early and hope you're going to make the exit or know you're going to make the exit. I think you had quite a bit of margin there. So probably could have got on the power slightly earlier that time. But at full speed, let's just listen again. Yeah, so we probably wait, as you can see from the amount of room you've got on the exit, we probably wait until it's a tiny bit too safe through there. You're generally not going to lose the rear on the exit of Stowe because you've just got bucket loads of downforce in this car at that point. So I reckon you could probably get on the power from about here. Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah, we did have that one moment, but we could probably find a different reason for why that happened. But you're on the throttle hard from here, basically. So maybe just slightly earlier. I tend to feel like I'm driving from the apex at full throttle, and you just kind of get used to knowing you're definitely going to make it on the exit. Now, one thing to think about, maybe when we had our spin on the previous one, we might have had a little bit of extra steering lock on that we didn't want. Maybe that caused it. We'll have a look. We'll have a think about that. But again, definitely not a big... You haven't lost a bucket through there. That's a pretty decent effort through Stowe there. Final couple of corners then. Okay, so this is just going to be another one of those slight marginal gains. We've got definitely some room to use to the right on the way in. So that's some of it. Decent apex on the left here. I quite often am not on the curb that I want to be on here, but I think you pretty much get there. Obviously, sausage curbs through here are absolutely lethal. So unlike into Maggots and Beckett's, you do not want to touch either of these ones. And you're a sensible margin away from that one. And you're not trying to super compromise that left in order to get a really nice run through the right. So that's good. A lot of people will come in here and their whole focus is on being all the way to the left at this point. But you're not doing that. You're going in quick enough that you end up in the middle. So that's good. If you were all the way over here on the left, that's something I'd be trying to fix, but you're not doing that. I think we've probably got a little bit of margin to this sausage curb on the right. Not a lot, but yeah, we could probably just turn in a tiny bit earlier, use a bit more room here. So if you add up all three of the bits of space we've got through this left-right section, there's probably a little bit of time to gain there, half a tenth or so just in using more room. And on the exit, this is all pretty good. Let me just listen to the throttle again. Yeah, no major complaints to there at all. And obviously the final corner, yeah, you're using all the track there. So I think on the whole, really good. And the sections that we're going to focus on are not the usual sections, which is nice. It's nice to be talking about something different for once. Let's have a look at the data now, just before you drive again. I'm just going to bring up VRS, and I'll show you it on my screen. It's just, hopefully it's loaded. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it just doesn't come up until like after the session, but let's have a little look. So 26 minutes ago, that's good. I think that means it was this one. Fingers crossed. Is that the lap we just did?
That was the last
Is that your previous session? That's weird. I don't know. I wonder why that is. I wonder why it doesn't. It'll definitely pop up in like an hour or something once we finish. But
yeah.
So what lap time did we do in this session? We did a 53.385.
Yeah.
And that's a 53,385. I think that's the one. That must be it. Unless you just did an identical time. But I think this is the session. This is the one we just did, I think.
Yeah, upload successful at 8:10. So
yeah, that's definitely it. So let's compare that against the target. Oh, in fact, okay, we'll just make that your target, and we'll move me to the comparison. We'll just check that the temperatures and stuff are the same. Sorry, this is a bit fiddly. It's that one there, isn't it? 258. Get your best lap. I guess that one. Right, let's have a little look. So if we just go for the full track, this will give us the most obvious gains. Okay, so when you're looking at this speed, I don't know how clearly you can see this, because obviously it's going to be shrunk down on your screen.
It's a little shrunk, but I can see it.
So I can see just at a glance that the section of track where we can make the most time is exactly what we thought, Maggots and Beckett's. And you can see the blue is the only real place on the whole lap where the blue line is kind of quite clearly above the red line. So that's good. That means we were just focusing on the right bits. But also, as we suspected, if you look over the whole lap, it's tiny bits everywhere. It's like a 100th, another 100th, another 100th, 500ths, 300ths, 500ths, 800ths. It's all, you're not doing anything wildly bad or slowly. It's teeny bits that will add up to a tenth and then another tenth somewhere else. But just before we get to Maggots and Beckett's, let's just have a little quick look at the biggest time gains. So, and actually, just before we do that, let me just check that I'm being fair with the temperatures, because obviously it makes a big difference. So, your track temperature 25, mine was just below 24. So I do have a slightly preferential track there. So let's not read too much into all of it, but the bigger sections will still be relevant at least. Hopefully 1 degree doesn't make all the difference.
Sorry, what does it say what your time was? I'm just curious.
So the lap time that we're comparing is 52.0. So like you said, so about, it's about a second. So not massive. It's exactly what you thought. It's kind of, that's the gap and that's the spread over the lap. But if it was all tiny bits, this would be a bit of a pain, because we just have to do a bunch of practice before we found anything. But luckily, it's not all just tiny bits. Some of it is chunks. And so turn 3 and 4, for example, is a chunk. So let's just have a look at that. So, okay, and we can have a look at the steering angle and see whether I was right about turning far. So turn 3 and 4, the first hairpin you get to, I was saying I thought on this lap that we just reviewed, you were turning a little bit late and, you know, squaring it off a bit too much. You could probably go in a bit earlier. And that's kind of tallies with what I did here. You can see the blue line on the steering trace just starts going right a bit earlier. But your one definitely goes a lot further. The red steering trace is at the peak. How many degrees? Like 30 degrees more steering, really, at the peak of steering. Actually, maybe 41 at the real big peak. So you're definitely turning the wheel further, but you were taking a slightly different line to me there. So maybe don't read too much into that. The key was just with... Sorry, go on.
Read what the what your degrees were versus mine?
Yes, absolutely. So mine was roughly 89.67.
Oh, okay, cool.
And you're at 131.1. So
really just kind of like try and cap it at 90. Like you don't need to.
Yes, although having said that, on different lines, you're going to need different amounts of steering angle. And if you're aiming for a late apex, you will naturally use a bit more steering angle. But that's part of the reason that I think we can just go in a little bit earlier for that one. You might not have done this on every lap, but on this particular one, there's like 3/10 really from mainly just that. You can see on the speed trace, by me just turning in a bit earlier, I'm just able to carry more speed up to that apex. And although you do get a better exit, as you'd imagine from a later apex, the straight's so short, you don't get to benefit from that better exit. So I'm getting a nice benefit, and you're not able to gain really from... I think you lose nearly 4/10, and then you gain back 0.5 from the exit. So that's the story through there. You do though.
Little gains.
Yeah, you do, however, gain a little bit on the next corner, because that line through there has allowed you to get a nicer exit through the hairpin. So there is actually a little bit more of a gain. So I'm being a bit harsh. By the end, it is a net 3/10 roughly. But anyway, so that's one corner. So pretty easy for us to maybe make a bit of a tweak there and find a bit of time. It might not come immediately, but as long as we know what we're aiming for through there, we can kind of monitor it. So the next few sections, nothing to really think about. You're not really losing anything. It's exactly as I thought through Brooklands and Luffield. We're almost exactly the same, really, in terms of the time, because you're already doing a good line. So, and you're already getting a nice exit. Not a lot to choose, but interesting to just have a look at the steering angle. In the left-hand part, you are using a bit more angle than me, but you're not necessarily doing the exact same line. So I'm not going to read into that. You're not using tons of steering. It's kind of okay. 20 degrees more, but yeah, you will do a slightly varied line through there. And in the right-hander, although you are keeping the lock on a little bit longer, you do get slightly more. You can see on the steering trace, and again, I'm sorry if this is a bit small on your screen. You can see I start to reduce the steering quite a lot earlier than you do. So that's maybe something we could think about. But again, that'll be to do with exactly where I got the car pivoted versus where you did. So if we looked at a different lap, that may well be different. And anyway, the time loss is only 1/10. It's not dramatic for that whole section.
Am I inducing understeer?
Yes, potentially. If we were looking at a steering trace here where you'd done essentially exactly the same line as me, and you're holding the steering lock on for longer, you're inducing understeer because you can see on the throttle trace here, you want to get on the power. And if you look how long it takes you to go from a little bit of throttle all the way to full throttle, we're talking about 50 meters difference between where I was able to get to full throttle and where you were able to get to full throttle. Because it's understeering a little bit. And so your steering staying on, you want to get on the throttle. Those two things are a conflict because you can't maintain lots of steering and get on the power hard because you're probably already on the limit there anyway. So one of them has to give effectively. And I think the reason this has happened, if you look at your throttle a bit earlier in the corner, my blue line on the throttle is pretty binary. I'm on the gas, I'm fully off, I'm waiting for it to rotate. It rotates and boom, back to full throttle. And you're nibbling at it a little bit in the middle. And sometimes that's actually the right thing to do. But I think in this instance, what you've done is probably push yourself in a little bit too fast, which has then meant you've had to wait longer. So you've made a small gain exactly here. And if you look at the time delta, you do make a tiny gain at the point you get on the throttle, but then you lose that again on the exit having to wait. So, But overall, you've actually barely lost anything. So some elements of what you're doing through Brooklands and Luffield are better than what I'm doing or a similar compromise. So that's why I don't think we need to worry too much about that. That's not one of the big chunks. Certainly, if you perfected that, you're going to gain a sixth of what you'll gain through just turn 3. So we won't worry about that too much. Let's have a look at the next big one. So there's a couple of big ones coming up. It's going to be Cops and Maggots and Beckett's. So I said I stayed in 6th. Am I talking rubbish or am I telling the truth? Let's have a look through the apex. Yep, so you're down to 5th. And I'm obviously looking at the gear down here now. And I stay in 6th. Yep, so good. At least I didn't misremember. You actually arrive there at slightly higher speed than me. You're going 1 kilometre an hour faster when you get there. And I definitely slow down more earlier on. So this is quite interesting. I love looking at this thing. And you asked me whether I brake. I definitely do. So you're not touching the brakes whatsoever. And I've got a pretty big brake. Much more than I thought. Although actually, I don't. It's 5%. It's 5%. It just looks. I always assume this is 0 to 100%, but it's not. It's not like the throttle. So yeah, it's only 5%. It is a brush of the brakes, but that's just getting it slowed down more. But look at how much exit speed that allows me to carry by getting it rotated early, because I'm immediately, the moment it gets to that lower speed, which is 4.5k slower than you've got to, I'm back to full throttle. Whereas you're just not able to get to full throttle for another 60, 70 meters, which is pretty far. And obviously that's why we then overlap in a different way in the speed trace. And I just carry that speed all the way up the next hill for ages. And that's why this is such a big time gain. It's under 2/10 really. But it is a time gain for sure. So the compromise, I think, if we can get used to it, there's some time on the table there, just staying in 6th. So it's one less job for you to do, at least. You don't have to worry about the gears. But just slowing a bit earlier, but angling out of the corner earlier. And if we look at the steering trace, quite a big difference in our two traces. You're turning in at exactly the point I'm turning in. But then there's a point where you're then having to crank on extra steering lock, and you're having to stay at half throttle. Whereas I'm actually using very little steering lock because the brakes have done a bit of that rotation, and then it's straight back to full throttle. So that's the difference there. We'll be a bit smoother, aim to just be going quicker through the middle, and eventually we'll nail that and we'll find a 1/10.5. But here's the big one. So Maggots and Becketts, right? This is going to look really weird and complicated on these traces because the way we are compromising is going to overlap so differently at different points that it'll look a bit weird. But the main takeaway, as you can see from the speed traces, for the first half of this whole section, so through the left-hander and into the main right-hand part of Maggots and Becketts, I'm travelling faster the entire time and quite a bit quicker at times. So it didn't look like that from riding on board. It looked like you were going really fast through there. You know, it looked like you were full throttle a lot of the time. And actually, you were full throttle for longer. So really, the reason you're slower at the beginning is just because you came off cop slower. So we can ignore that bit. But it's from here onwards. So it's from the point where you come off the throttle. Even though I'm off earlier, I'm maintaining more speed. And that's because the brakes that you're doing are quite a lot more severe. And that's just in the initial section. Yep. So that's one thing. We can afford to brake less. I'm kind of almost just touching them just to get a little bit of weight transfer onto the front to move through the right-hander. I'm also using a bit more...
Yeah.
No, I was just saying I'm also using a bit more of that curb we were talking about. So the sausage curb and on the left and then a bit more curb on the right. So that's also allowing me to get away with less braking. And your steering trace pretty good through here, by the looks of it. You're not steering any more than I am, but it's slightly out of sync. So your maximum steering is 20 or 30 meters later than my maximum steering. So that's quite interesting. And then in the second phase, you can see you've got a lot more right-hand lock on than I have. And this is all about that, where you were trying to get the car pinned to the left, ready to get a really good exit, and I wasn't caring as much. Yep. The reason I've got less steering is because I'm not trying to stay as tight to the left. I'm letting it flow further to the middle or to the right. So that's obvious why there's more steering. That's not really an indication of you causing understeer or anything like that, because the car isn't understeering for you. That's just your different line, that steering there. But the throttle is really different, and this is a little bit like we were seeing in in Luffield a while ago, where I was fully off the throttle or confidently getting back on. I'm either flat at the top, aside from these tiny, tiny blips, I'm back flat at the top or flat at the bottom. Whereas the entire middle phase of Maggots and Becketts, you're kind of wandering on half throttle. You're not kind of decisively saying go faster or rotate more. You're kind of just hedging your bets of it and being somewhere in the middle. And that's really interesting. So that's something that we're going to try and iron out by being very defined in how we get through this section. Full throttle, lift, full throttle for a burst, lift, and the whole lift period is where we're getting it to rotate. This whole bit from here to here is where I'm in the middle of the track coming into the final right-hand part of Beckett's, and I was saying the car just kind of lets you do it anyway. Part of the reason it's letting me is because I'm fully off the throttle, so it's letting me rotate a bit more. If you tried to do that with the amount of throttle you've got on at this point, it would push wide and you would run off out of track in the end. So it's very, very different style through here, but we can see it's quite a lot of lap time gain, potentially. 3/10 through this whole section is a big chunk of 1 second, isn't it? So if we can nail this, you're going to take a massive step forward towards being on the pace, at Silverstone anyway, but this kind of thing will apply to other tracks too.
Right, and so that's interesting, because I feel like I found a lot of pace with maintenance throttle.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I'm doing here is, just trying not to be off the throttle and coasting, but just sort of have this bit of maintenance throttle while I'm waiting for the corner to come to me. Obviously, that all goes out the window with the change in line that we talked about. But, is there a time, and I'll ask this again, for like a rule, and I know there's no rule, but is there like a time when maintenance throttle is the answer versus when it's just, wait for the time to nail it and just go? Probably with these cars, less so.
Yeah, so I might think of an example, but in general, it's basically the same answer as before. if the data proved that that was a quicker way for whatever reason, then yes. And then we might find some places around here, maybe in the final corner, for example, or the penultimate corner, in the middle of the little chicane. It might be that that's a maintenance throttle section. But really, I wouldn't, unless I was in a very long corner, like a long, constant radius corner, a bit like Luffield, but even in Luffield, we don't tend to do this. We find a different compromise. That's maybe when I'd say, well, I can't give it more throttle because I'll run wider. I don't want to be completely off the throttle because I'll just be going slower than I need to. So maybe half throttle and kind of test the waters is the right thing to do. But in this section, just by the nature of the way it flows, I think it works better to kind of be full throttle and then lift to get the car to rotate and then pretty much back to full throttle. If we were to zoom right in, obviously it isn't straight to full throttle. If you look at my application, even in the middle here, you could argue that this almost 45-degree line of throttle between here and here, which is, I don't know, 50 meters or something like that, that is effectively a bit of maintenance throttle. It's always being at the maximum that you can currently get away with. I could have probably quite as easily gone to half throttle and held it there and then gone like a step up to full throttle. But that naturally would have meant there was some time before and some time after that I was wasting time, if you see what I mean. By doing doing this shape of throttle, I'm using as much as I possibly can at all elements of that section. I love going into this detail. This is the best. This is much better than try not to spin as much. Like that's this is much more rewarding.
A couple of spins, but I think that was just because I was chasing pace.
No, that's fine. That's not quite the same. Okay, so just to finish up this section, obviously, as we said, your line does give you a better exit, but very quickly our speed traces merge again as we head out. So we're basically effectively at the same speed, give or take half a kilometre an hour before you're even on the hanger straight. So it just goes to show you that compromise, this is the gain you're making by staying left and then having a nice line on the exit. So what is that gain? We can actually quantify it. It's so you were 7/10 behind there, and let's say we get to here. Yeah, you're not even. It's not even. It's like 100th, isn't it? Yeah. It's barely any gain. It's something, but in a different car, it would be more of a gain. In a car that it wasn't lightweight, didn't have big slicks, and didn't have a load of downforce, it would be more of a gain. But in this car, we can get away with more of a middle of the road. Anyway, I've banged on about this corner too much. Let's just quickly get to the end.
So would you ever take that line at Silverstone, regardless of what you're driving?
I think the car would have to have a handling deficiency that necessitated it, if you see what I mean. If I was getting loads of understeer, unless I used loads more room. So if the car I was driving, and I tried to take the line that I've just shown you I was doing there, if I did that line and it just pushed really wide and it was awful, then yes, I'd compromise more, go for more of a style that you're using. But the car would need to make that an issue. So most of the time, not necessarily a bad car, but just a car that you didn't have as much front end as these do. Okay, so really the next big couple of gains, this is interesting. So that's Maggots and Beckett's. So really the next big gain, we can kind of skip past Stowe because once again, hanger straight, it's barely anything. Stowe, it's just under 1/10. What's different? Okay, so the difference here really is I'm going in slower. You're staying on the throttle way later than me. That's interesting. But the real big thing is the steering angle. When you see just how much extra steering you've got on for how much longer between this section here and here, which is about 100 meters, maybe. It's a big section anyway. It's a real long distance. You've got much more steering on. I think that's because you've gone in quicker and you are understeering and you're just hanging on to extra steering because it's probably just in slip that whole way. So it might have just been this particular lap. It didn't look bad riding on board. It looked pretty good to me. But we can see for sure you can probably just exactly the same braking shape. Look how identical our braking traces are. Basically identical shape all the way down. You're just offset by a couple of tenths of a second. You're just doing it a bit later than I am. So you can pretty much do exactly the same kind of braking, just do it a little bit earlier. And you can see what it's done to the throttle. You've tried to get on the throttle early. You've then had to come back off again. and then get back to full throttle. Whereas I've got a similar thing to some other place we've seen where I've come off, and then at the point I can get back on, I've got back on, and I've never had to come back off again. That's all.
Right.
And that's really helped on the exit. Down to the final chicane, you can see you actually are making quite a nice big gain between the entry and mid-corner, but then you lose it down the next straight just because there's more potential to gain it back there. So that's that one. But all of that we've just spoken about, still under a tenth. So it's not one of the big ones. It's not one of the ones I think we should focus on. Final corners are the big one. So let's see, what's the big differences. Okay, so again, you're probably just a bit too brave on the brakes, just going in a little bit later and therefore having to brake harder. Again, with the caveat, this is just this lap. You might have done it slightly differently on other laps. You made a little bit of a gain on the way in, but then through the middle, just probably because I've just been slightly more under control because I've not been on quite as on the limit on the approach. Just a bit neater through the middle, not had to use as much steering lock. So in the left-hander, you've got quite a lot more angle on than I have. 58 degrees more, it's quite a lot. And in the right-hander as well, 25 degrees or so more. I obviously got very sideways on the exit though, by the looks of it. But our throttle traces are pretty similar. The one big difference, this is interesting actually, it's similar, we tend to see these trends, this is what I like picking up on, similar to Maggots and Beckett's. You've kind of reflected the throttle trace I've done in between these two. Well, I'm getting through the left, going full throttle, and then off the throttle entirely to get the front to rotate. To get the weight on the front and get the car to rotate. And then back to full throttle, albeit smoothly, as early as I can. Whereas because you've not come fully off the throttle, it hasn't rotated as much, and you've had to wait a little bit longer to get on the gas. That's it. And I think part of this is because this car is very, very stiff and very light, you don't get much weight transfer with a small lift. It almost has to be a significant, or full lift, especially in a tight corner like this, to get that weight on the front. So I think that's probably where that's stemming from. But you're certainly doing the right thing. You can just do it more. You can get on the power harder and then get off the power harder as well. And that will hopefully...
maintenance throttle.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've seen it consistently. Anyway, there we go. That's the whole lap. So on this next run then, key things to look at are going to be turn 3, the first hairpin. We'll just go in a little bit earlier with a little bit more speed. Don't worry too much about the exit of that hairpin. So that was here. And then we can pretty much just rely on your natural driving exactly as you are until we then get to cops, where we're going to stay in 6th gear and brake a tiny bit to get the nose in. But almost the moment you've braked, you're straight back on the gas. If you have a look at the way it overlaps here, I'm getting back on the gas before I've even come fully off the brakes. It's that close. It's like brake gone. It's like real kind of switch. And then we'll drive off of there fast and use all the exit you need to, even if you pick up a 1x to begin with, just to get used to carrying that speed. And obviously the big one is going to be barreling on into Maggots and Beckett's. I expect us to cock this up a few times first, so don't worry. Don't worry if this all goes wrong. I'll try and just remind you, use the sausage curb. That'll kind of start you off on the right foot. Use the big red one on the left. Get early into the right and stay flat out over that right. And then in the next left, only down 1 gear. And then the next right, down 1 gear. And that's it. That's like the key things to focus on. Sausage curb, right-hand curb, down 1 gear, down another gear, off onto the hanger straight. That's kind of like the sequence. So I'm going to shut up now and go back to iRacing. Let's do it.
All right.
So let's do exactly the same. 5 time laps. If we need another couple, if something goes wrong, then we'll do a couple more. But let's go for it.
Let's do this.
Yeah, obviously, all of those things we just spoke about, first lap, probably not the time to do them when it's cold.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the steering wheel lock, so I'm just gonna mess around with that for a minute. Also, take that. Hello, oversteer. Sorry, had a buzz on my watch, and I had to look down and miss that apex. Alright. Let's see if I can at least hit this sausage curve here. Yeah, that works.
See, even on the grass, it's really stable, isn't it? So you don't need to worry about losing control through that one.
Sorry, I was trying to see how much I could take from there. Taking a massive slowdown now. Oh, look at that. It's bleeding off as it goes. That's great. I'm going to get rid of this thing before it pops up. There we go, a little sausage curb. Oh, there too. Alright. Still gonna be slow on this first flying lap, but let's see what happens.
I think that actually went pretty well, but yeah, you can get on the gas earlier because you're in sixth. You've got lots of stability.
Slow down.
Okay, so just based on what I've seen there, you're now just trying to go a little bit too quick into the bit where you were going further to the left than I was before. So don't forget, you do need to still slow down a little bit. You can't just barrel on in there without any kind of brakes. So just a little kind of trail braking to make sure it doesn't go super deep into the corner. You want to end up somewhere in the middle.
Yep. Too much steering angle.
Very nice apex.
Look at that.
That was nice.
And we hit the limiter. Great.
The lines were good.
Thanks.
So remember, if you've got it set up early, you can get on the throttle early.
Oh, look at that. 7,
Nice.
8 tenths. Sorry, hundredths. Come on. No.
It's okay.
Yeah,
So in the right-hand section there, the difference now is, because you're on a different line to what you're used to, there's a little moment of hesitation you'll have to do in order to keep it tight enough through that right-hander.
Yep.
We're getting closer.
Getting all the off tracks. This is great.
It's always going to be a bit scrappy when you're like barreling in a bit quicker than normal.
Yeah, I'm just trying to carry that speed.
but you've got to get it wrong in order to wind it back and then get it right. So this is all fine.
Even with that bobble, it's still 10th up.
Good, good.
Hesitated on the gas. Alright, let's try and not fuck this up.
Nice and slow for the right. So
using enough brakes.
So we'll just slow a little earlier for the right. That's the closest we've got so far. The left part was pretty good. Just make sure we're slowing it early enough to definitely make the right-hand part. Nice use of the track on the entry there.
Thank you. Ah.
Oh, that bloody sausage
Sorry, I'm
curve.
focusing more on the gas than on where I'm going.
I hate those curves.
I realized I was still doing the maintenance throttle. I felt slow, and it was. Oops. Somehow went down 2 gears, but great.
Every lap, you're getting closer to the right compromise to there, so it's just a case of finding it. We'll get there eventually.
There we go. That was at least 10th and a half. Another 10th. That's nice. Massive slide.
Okay, so
Too
now,
slow.
yeah, so now I think we're just being a bit too brave in the section that we're trying to change there. So you've gone the right direction. I think we just need to wind it back a little bit in terms of the speed we're carrying.
Okay.
So do one more time. I know this will be 6 time laps. Just do another one, just so we've got fully representative data.
Okay.
That's nice.
Gave me an off track for that.
Don't worry about that. I don't count that one. Okay, so this time just slow it a little earlier for the left and a little earlier for the right for the 2 corners that are the tighter ones. That's nicer. And then you can get early on the gas. That was much, much neater, much more like we want. I've got no idea what the delta looks like, but that looked a lot better.
Cool. Yeah, it's about 500s up. Couldn't get through without losing some tenths on a sausage curb, so it's perfect.
Okay, well, I mean, at least that was quicker. We are down to a 53.0. Okay, yeah. So obviously that last lap we can probably agree it wasn't perfect. There were still places even on that last one where there was some reasonably easy time on the table. You know, just like little mistakes. It's still the quickest. So I'm happy that we've at least seen some kind of tangible time improvement, but I'm sure just like left to your own devices to do a bunch of laps, you will just naturally go quicker and quicker anyway. But the track is a little bit hotter than when we started as well, so just to give you the a little bit of benefit of the doubt there too. I'm going to have to shoot off in about 10 minutes because I've got another session, but I want to look at the data from that run before we end this one, because every lap you did there, you got closer and closer and closer to the ideal look through Maggots and Beckett's that I want you to do. So that last one was obviously the best. I'm just going to shoot to that section on the video just to show you what part of it I thought was good and what could have been better. So you're definitely doing a decent job through Cops here. This lap I don't think was the best. I think we just slightly missed the apex, but the more you do this, the more you'll... Yeah, we were just a little bit wide there, and that obviously then affects you on the exit and forces you wider, etc. But you are sticking with 6th, and you'll just perfect the exact line. But I think it is just objective fact that you are able to gain more time if you get it right in 6th than you are if you get it perfect in 5th. Right, so let's just have a look through Maggots and Beckett's. I'll do it full speed, and I'll just wind it back and do it slowly. So that, I think, is pretty good. I still think you can probably turn in a tiny bit earlier here, just so when you arrive at this curb, you're slightly more parallel with the actual sausage curb. Whereas you see, you're kind of coming in at a slight angle. I think you can just arrive there at a slightly shallower angle. Not the end of the world at all, though. It's this part that's the tricky bit, where you have to start slowing down, but not too much, and then slow down a bit more, but not too much. Whereas before you were just doing it too much in general, and at the beginning of this run, you were just not slowing down enough at all, because obviously what we've been discussing is you want to be quicker in this section, so you were like, yeah, screw it, I'm going to go in really quick, and it was just pushing you really deep. This was pretty decent though, I think. I mean, really nice apexes both sides, to be honest. So if that wasn't a big time gain, then there's obviously just a little bit more margin for entry speed in all the different sections. But in terms of the geometry that you've managed to achieve here, I think that's pretty good. That looks pretty nice to me. So what you're not doing is coming around here and trying to stay straight near the left here. You're clearly at an angle already, heading towards the right-hand part.
Yeah.
I think probably where the time to be gained through here still is a little bit earlier on the throttle in this section here, but that's just confidence. I mean, this is like the first time you managed to get through there, and it looked good. So that'll just come with time. And there's probably slightly more margin for speed through here, but I told you to wind it back a bit on this lap, so that's not a bad thing. Definitely the best I've seen. So I'm going to have, if the data's uploaded, I'll just have a little look at the data now. Let's just kill this one and go back. It's a bit of a pain, because when you refresh, it doesn't actually, you have to go back to the start for it to properly refresh. Let's just have a check. Fingers crossed the latest data's there. 2 minutes ago. Good. That's good. This will be the one. Right, so let's again, I'll just have the same. In fact, let's put your first session as the first one. So it was that lap there. It was that one. And on that last one, the fastest lap was the final one. There we go. So not too much hotter, actually, just half a degree hotter the track, so it's not too bad. So let's see, if we look at the whole track, where's the time? So over the whole track, you were 2.5 tenths quicker. Let's have a look where so through Magnets and Beckett's, you can see you've definitely done something massively different at this point. You're doing a really, really different style through there. So what corner number is it? Is it this one? Is it here? Okay, so based on your previous run, obviously you're arriving there quicker, which is good, and you're carrying way, way more speed through the first part. So this here looks much more like it did versus my lap, like way more. So from here to here, you've actually gained 2.5 tenths, isn't it? No, 2 tenths. If looking at the entire section, obviously you arrive there quicker too. But so just from here, you're already half a tenth up. And by the time we get to the point where you start losing time, yeah, so it's 2 tenths you've gained. So that's a significant chunk you've just gained there. But we're obviously then losing a bit too much on the exit. So whereas when we looked at my data, you did gain a little bit here in your previous style, but we very quickly equaled out. You're not quite. And let's have a look at the reason why. Let's work out why that is. Look at this, look at your throttle trace. It's so much more like my throttle trace was. On, fully off, pretty much. You're kind of giving it a little bit of maintenance. Fully on, fully off, fully on. Like, way different. And much less braking. So what is the difference? Why are we slow here? Well, it's basically because you've arrived here probably just slightly too fast. And let's have a look at the steering angle. Oh, look, you're using way less steering too. Much, much less steering. That's good. It looks nice. I think we've just essentially gone in. Are we late on the throttle? No, you're not late on the throttle. It's just your previous one. You were able to be on the throttle more because you were just on a different line. You can even see you can see how much difference it was here. Yeah. So I think really what we need to do is just basically blend this portion to this portion slightly more. So a little bit more of a compromise on the new technique. So going a little bit slower at this phase as we transition from the left into the right, and that will then allow you to be slightly quicker on the next phase because you won't have to wait as long to get on the throttle. So it's just that kind of merging of the compromise. But you've definitely switched to the right one. You've definitely switched to the quicker one, and even kind of doing a scrappy version of what I was trying to get you to do. You're still quicker. You've still found a gain. So I think that's good. I'm happy with that at least.
I'll take it.
And was there anywhere else? And you're slightly quicker there. There were a couple of places where you weren't any quicker, but you weren't also losing much time at those. So what it was Cops, wasn't it? Was the other big one. And yeah, and so you've got not far off a 10th gain through Cops. So that's good too. And you probably weren't. Look at the difference. It's so much better. so much better on the speed trace. You can just see the compromises in the right place now, even though it feels a bit bogged down in 6th gear. And you can see you're using a little bit of brake, up to 20%. So,
20%.
yeah, a little bit more than I was, but really not bad at all. Not bad at all. So, yeah, I'm happy with that. I think that's good. On this particular lap, obviously you went a bit deep as well. So this isn't the best form of your cops that you can do. You can definitely do that better. You can see how you're still decelerating all the way down kind of gradually to here as you're kind of already exiting the corner. Really, we want to be increasing speed from about here. But because of you just missing the apex slightly, it wasn't as good as it could have been. You can see your steering locks on for longer, but that's just as a consequence of missing that apex. God, that was good. That was good fun. I'm really, really pleased with that. So hopefully, sorry we don't have longer to just carry on chatting for ages and to do another couple of runs. I've got to jump in a session with a Ferrari at Fuji next, which is very different.
Sorry,
But
I gotta get to work.
okay. Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, first thing in the morning for you still. But I think there's a load of positives to take from that. The baseline that you're at is pretty much exactly what I thought you'd be doing. And you're better at certain things than I thought you would be. And within just the space of 5 or 6 laps, you're able to pretty much put into practice something which is totally different to what your muscle memory has been up until this point. So it's quite hard to make those changes and do them neatly. And you were pretty much able to there. So given another hour, half an hour, whatever, I think we'd be finding a lot more of that second. So we can discuss over the next few days, I guess, what you want to do next if you want to just carry on doing Silverstone, or if it's more relevant to focus on where you're going next with your series, or if you're doing a different series. But see what you think, because anything we do at any track will have relevance and bleed over onto other tracks. So I quite like it if we're doing it for a reason, because you're racing here soon, it just gives you that little bit of extra motivation to nail it. So
Sounds good. And let me just take a quick look at my calendar, because I'm actually this was a terrible time to start this whole process, because I've got for work I've got a trial. I'm a lawyer.